All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to reframe something you do literally every single day. Whether you're just jotting down a quick grocery list, firing off a text message to a friend, or typing out some massively complex business report, you are participating in a tradition that reaches back across millennia. Today, we're diving deep into what is arguably humanity's absolute most profound technological leap, the invention of writing. We're going to explore exactly how this incredible tool evolved, why it was created out of sheer absolute necessity, and how it fundamentally reprogrammed the entire human experience. For hundreds of thousands of years, every human story disappeared the exact moment it was spoken. Then, one invention changed civilization forever. Just imagine that for a second. Try to picture a world entirely without a permanent record. It's a world where human knowledge is completely trapped in the present moment, vanishing as quickly as breath in the cold air. The history, the rich culture, the daily life, and hard-won survival lessons of ancient peoples, it all lived exclusively in the fragile vessel of the human mind. Until finally, this one revolutionary invention allowed us to practically conquer time itself. You really have to consider the stark fragility of oral history when you compare it to the incredible permanence of written text. Spoken words are inherently tied to the physical presence of the speaker, right? They literally vanish instantly as sound waves. In early human societies, if a village elder passed away, their entire library of knowledge, their memories, their highly specific survival skills, they could easily just die with them. Written words, on the other hand, can last for millennia. Writing essentially became civilization's external hard drive. It gave us the power to transmit complex thoughts across vast distances of physical space and, way more importantly, across deep chasms of time. So let's step back and look at the world before writing. Think all the way back to the year 35,000 BCE. This is the approximate time human beings are actually thought to have developed complex spoken language. And we definitely see this deep urge to communicate preserved in the stunning cave paintings of the Cro-Magnon era, places like Lascaux or Chauvet. You look at these walls, and early humans are expressing concepts about their daily life, painting these vivid, absolutely breathtaking scenes of aurochs and hunting expeditions. It strongly hints at storytelling. But here's the catch. While a painting of a hunt is a beautiful piece of communication, it falls just short of true writing. It's a pictorial representation of an event. It isn't a structured system that encodes the specific syntax, the grammar, or the phonetic sounds of a spoken language. It represents an idea, sure, but it doesn't represent the actual words used to describe that idea. So how did people remember anything complex before they could just write it down? Well, they relied entirely on the oral tradition. Before text existed, literature was actually a collection of rhythmic chants, magical charms, and highly structured verses that were recited by priests, shamans, and bards. The rhythm, the meter, and the rhyme of ancient poems, like the early roots of the Iliad or the Odyssey, they weren't just there for artistic beauty. They were vital structural glue. They were literally mnemonic devices designed to prevent the storyteller from forgetting the next line. But the human brain has absolute limits. As populations began to explode and societies became significantly more sophisticated, relying strictly on the human memory to store expanding economic and administrative data became a massive, glaring bottleneck for human progress. Which brings us to the invention of memory. Here is a fascinating truth. Writing wasn't actually invented to record history. It wasn't invented to write beautiful poetry or to tell epic myths. It was invented out of urgent, practical economic necessity. Down in Sumer, in southern Mesopotamia around 3600 BCE, the very first major cities, like Uruk, were rapidly rising. We're talking tens of thousands of citizens. Agricultural yields were booming, long-distance trade was expanding, and taxation systems managed by these vast temple complexes were becoming incredibly convoluted. The human memory simply could not keep track of who owed what, which parcels of grain went to which destination, or exactly how many jars of beer were traded yesterday. The immense logistical demands of commerce essentially forced humans to invent a physical, permanent ledger. And we can trace a super clear evolution from basic agricultural tracking right up to true written language. It all started with simple accounting tokens, these small clay pieces shaped like cones or spheres that represented commodities. Again, mostly beer and sheep. Over time, administrators began pressing these tokens into wet clay envelopes called boule to basically seal transactions. Eventually, a light bulb went off, and they realized they could just draw the shape of the token directly onto the clay. These became pictographs, simple, static symbols impressed into wet clay. But a picture of a sheep just means sheep. It doesn't convey action. The monumental breakthrough here was the rebus principle. This is where symbols started representing actual spoken sounds, phonograms, rather than just literal objects. Imagine drawing a picture of a bee and then a picture of a leaf to create the abstract word belief. That is a real game changer. Writing was no longer just a static picture of a thing. It was a recording of a spoken sentence. To really grasp how powerful this shift was, just compare these two methods. A basic pictogram gives us a static image of two sheep and a temple. Okay, that's helpful for a basic inventory, but are the sheep coming or going? Are they alive? Are they dead? Who is bringing them? But with a phonogram, because the symbols represent phonetic sounds and syllables, we get a highly dynamic sentence. Two sheep are being delivered to the temple of Inanna. This shift transformed simple, rigid accounting lists into a robust, incredibly flexible system that could convey motion, direction, purpose, and all the wonderful nuance of human speech. And with this new technology came the rise of the scribe. This early writing in Mesopotamia was called cuneiform. The word itself comes from the Latin cuneus, which means wedge. The tactile, physical reality of the scribe's daily work was actually pretty intense. It involved taking a wedge-shaped stylus, typically carved from a reed plucked straight from the muddy banks of the Tigris or Euphrates rivers, and pressing it into small tablets of soft, wet clay. Once the scribe was finished writing, these clay tablets were dried in the harsh Mesopotamian sun or baked in kilns. They became humanity's very first portable, permanent records. It was a completely revolutionary way to freeze time, package complex information, and literally hand it to someone else, or securely store it away in a royal archive for decades. But the sheer dedication required to master this art was absolutely staggering. Early writing systems were notoriously difficult to learn. Scribes attended strict scribal schools known as the Aduba, or tablet house. Here, boys endured rigorous, genuinely punishing years of training, sometimes facing physical discipline just to memorize hundreds of complex, wedge-shaped signs through endless rote copying. But the payoff? Absolute authority. Because literacy was incredibly rare and so utterly vital to the functioning of an empire, scribes wielded immense power. They formed an educated elite that managed administration, dictated taxation, and controlled religion, directly serving pharaohs, kings, and high priests. In many ways, scribes were the essential operating system of the ancient state. Now, let's talk about rewriting human civilization. Once established, the transformation across every single sector of society was staggering. In government, rulers went from relying on spoken decrees that could be misinterpreted or forgotten to establishing uniform, unchangeable legal codes carved into stone steles for all to see, like the famous Code of Hammurabi. In trade, local memory-based tabs became legally binding written contracts, which allowed for massive long-distance trade networks to safely span entire continents. In literature, oral myths that morphed over generations were finally locked down into preserved epics, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's oldest surviving epic tale. And perhaps most beautifully, human identity itself was preserved. Around 2300 BC, an Akkadian high priestess named Enheduanna, the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, became the first author in human history to formally sign her own name to her work. Now, interestingly enough, not everyone loved this new technology. The famous Greek philosopher Socrates was actually deeply suspicious of it. As recorded by his student Plato, Socrates argued that relying on written words would severely weaken human memory. He said it would create forgetfulness in the learner's souls. He genuinely believed written text was a dead, static thing, vastly inferior to the living, interactive, face-to-face debate that forced a mind to truly engage with an idea. It's a fascinating historical footnote, really. It reminds us that every massive technological leap, even one as foundational as writing, inevitably comes with its brilliant skeptics. Next up, the alphabetic revolution. So true writing wasn't just invented in one place and then politely handed out to the rest of the world. It was a profound human necessity recognized and invented completely independently in at least 4 different locations. Shortly after Sumerian cuneiform emerged in Mesopotamia, Egyptian hieroglyphs, often called sacred carvings, developed along the Nile Valley. Over in ancient China around 1200 BC, writing emerged during the Shang dynasty from divination rituals, where diviners carved symbols into heated turtle shells and ox scapula, known as oracle bone script. And entirely independently, half a world away in Mesoamerica, civilizations like the Maya developed a remarkably complex and visually stunning writing system of their own. Humans all over the world organically realized that they had this profound need to externally record their existence. But while writing was invented multiple times, the alphabet, A drastically simplified system where symbols stand for single consonant or vowel sounds rather than whole words or syllables is only known to have been invented exactly once in human history. Around 1800 BC, a community of Canaanite turquoise miners working at Serabat el-Qadim in the Sinai Peninsula adapted complex Egyptian hieroglyphs to represent their own distinct spoken sounds. This single, brilliant phonetic simplification, known as the Proto-Sinaitic script, was later picked up by the Phoenicians. Because the Phoenicians were master seafarers and merchants, they essentially marketed and spread this highly efficient script across the entire Mediterranean basin. This single innovation eventually became the direct ancestor for Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, and eventually the very letters we use to communicate today. Let's bring it all together and look at our written legacy. Consider the number 30,000. That is exactly how many clay tablet books the highly educated Assyrian king Ashurbanipal collected in his grand library in Nineveh in the 7th century BCE. Ashurbanipal intuitively understood that dispatching his scribes across the empire to gather literature, myths, and historical accounts was the ultimate form of power and preservation. It was ancient humanity's most ambitious attempt to literally back up the world's data, ensuring that the heritage and culture of an entire region would outlast any single human life. And here is the ultimate historical irony. When Nineveh was eventually attacked and burned to the ground by its enemies, those massive fires actually baked the clay tablets. The destruction is what preserved Ashurbanipal's library for modern archaeologists to discover thousands of years later. It's also wild to notice how the physical materials of writing have evolved over time. We move from incredibly heavy, localized baked clay tablets in Mesopotamia to the light woven pith of Egyptian papyrus and animal parchment developed in places like Pergamum. Then, humanity advanced to the mass-produced paper first pioneered in Han China, which fueled the revolutionary printing press in Gutenberg's Germany. Today, we've abstracted writing down to pure digital code, processed by computers and instantly beamed to smartphones across the globe. As our media shifted from heavy, localized materials to weightless, global transmission, our capacity to share complex thoughts vastly accelerated. The evolution of the medium itself allowed for faster, more widespread, and far more layered human collaboration. Which really brings us to a profound realization. Writing is humanity's ultimate time machine. It is our species' external hard drive. Every modern text message you send, every email you draft, and every news article you read is part of a single, unbroken chain of human ingenuity. It's a chain that stretches all the way back over 5,000 years to the bustling, dusty streets of ancient Uruk, to Sumerian accountants desperately trying to find a way to keep track of how many jars of beer and heads of sheep they had sitting in the temple storeroom. So, the next time you absent-mindedly write your name on a piece of paper or quickly type a message on your phone, take a brief moment to remember what you are actually doing. You are wielding one of humanity's absolute greatest inventions. You are participating in a miraculous system that conquered death and time, a tool that allowed human civilizations to remember, to learn, and to relentlessly build upon the brilliant ideas of every single generation that came before them.